All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Today we got a very special guest. I say that every time, which is good, I guess, because we're getting very special guests. But we have Mike from Devils River Whiskey. Here's Mike. He's going to tell us a little story, and hopefully it'll be a fun ride. Hey, Mike.
Hey, how are you, Randall? It's good
I'm good.
to be on your program. Thanks for having us.
No, no problem.
Yeah, my name is Mike Cameron. I have been in the industry for close to 20 years now. Devils River is the second distillery project that I have been involved with. Um, and since we're talking about Devils River today, I'll focus on that. I've always had a love for bourbon. Come from a bourbon family. My mother is born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, and as my grandfather was as well. And so it's been kind of part of our family heritage for a long time. So I wanted to start a bourbon distillery. Started working on this project around 2015. And to be in the whiskey business, you have to be forward thinking, which means you have to put whiskey down and wait. It's very capital intense. So we didn't release our first expression until 2017.
Oh, wow.
And people ask me all the time, where did the name Devil's River come from? And it is actually a real place in Texas. For those of you that don't know, it's about 3 hours southwest of San Antonio, near the border of Texas, and it's a real beautiful place. It's Texas Parks and Wildlife deems it the purest water in Texas.
Oh, wow.
So I liked that part of it. I liked the name. I thought it'd be a fun whiskey name. But I
Mhm.
really got introduced to the Devil's River back in college many, many years ago, where I went on a fishing trip, float trip with some buddies back in college. Wasn't in the whiskey business back then, but years later started thinking about a cool name for a brand, and Devil's River just really stuck well with me. Some fun wordplay, the devil's in the details, or the devil made me do it, or sin responsibly, or all the fun wordplay you can have with it.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
but it was you know the first thing was coming up with a recipe and a name. Having done this before, I was able to accelerate the project a little bit faster because I was familiar with the industry. Before I was ever in the industry, I did home brewing and home distilling. So decided to go legal, I guess, 20 years ago, and but it was always for personal use and experimentation and trying to, develop the craft. And back then, the craft spirits industry was relatively new. The first distillery I did, I think we were number 8 in Texas,
Hmm.
and we were like at number 80 in the United States. And now there's, at last count, 2,713 craft distilleries in North America. So there's quite a few.
Wow.
Um, I'm the current president of the Texas Distilled Spirits Association. We have 212 registered DSPs in the state of Texas. Not everybody's producing necessarily spirits. Some need that permit for other processes, but the distilling industry, long and short, has really grown, not just in Texas, but nationwide. I'm proud of the accomplishments of Texas. Texas is now number 1 in vodka production.
Wow.
And that's relatively new development with brands like Tito's and Deep Eddy and Dripping Springs and Enchanted Rock and others. And we oscillate between 3 and 4, usually 4 in the United States on whiskey production. So there's more whiskey produced in Texas than most of the rest of the country. So
Yeah.
the obvious, Kentucky and Tennessee and a little bit in Indiana are typically 1, 2, and 3, but Texas is now number 4. So we're also number 3 in number of distilleries in the United States. So it's been an honor to be the president of the Texas Distilled Spirits Association and watch our industry grow. I think I've been in this position for about 8 years with them. I was originally founding member, but later became president, and I get to know all the distillers that are willing to join our organization, and we share ideas, and so it's been great. The Devil's River, going back to that, is a 94-mile long confluence. The headwaters begin technically up in San Marcos, and you've got this limestone filtered water meandering down, set to the southwest, down to ultimately Del Rio into Lake Amistad. But the waters resurface back again in Juneau, Texas, and that's the north end of the Devil's River, and it's mainly spring fed. But by the time it reaches the end of that run, the Devils River run, it is so pure. The water has been scrubbed by the gravel beds and the limestone, and there's no iron in it. It's rich in calcium content and minerals, and so it makes, to make good whiskey. We always say, good distillers will say, to make good whiskey requires good water. So
Absolutely.
trying to find the best water I could, and it just so happened to be the Devils River. So I started searching for a landowner on the Devils River that would sell me water, and it was very difficult at first trying to find a water source. Most of them probably thought I was crazy asking to buy some of their water to go up to San Antonio and make whiskey. But
Right.
finally found a gentleman who was he's got a beautiful 10,000 acre ranch on the southern end of the Devils River. I wanted to get water. I was focused on the southern end because I didn't want people, environmentalists, to be thinking that I'm draining this beautiful river. I'm taking it from after it's already run its course, if that makes sense. And on his property is the second largest springs in Val Verde County. And we draw water from those springs and we truck it up to San Antonio where we blend our whiskey with it. So in every bottle of Devil's River, there is some water from the actual Devil's River.
That's really
We
cool.
also like to say that we give back more than we take. So we are one of the largest corporate contributors to the Devil's River Conservancy, which is a group that basically oversees and manages the well-being of the Devil's River. This goes for river management, river cleanup, and river protection. Even the night sky at the Devil's River is now protected, which is one of the few skies in the whole state of Texas that's actually protected. So
Wow.
that's kind of an interesting thing. They only allow 12 kayaks per day on the entire 94-mile long confluence. You have to register with the state. You just don't show up at the Devil's River and start floating it. You have to do it by permit and you have to register with the state. And that's a good thing. I'd encourage anybody that hasn't been down there, do yourself a favor and go down there. Cell phones don't work, which is wonderful.
Absolutely.
You can come off the grid for a few days. They
Yeah.
have a couple of good outfitters down there, and some great campsites, and it's just unlimited beauty. It's unlike anything else I've ever seen in Texas. It's also all catch and release on the fishing, so the fishing's fantastic. But it's just a lot of history there with the caves and the old Indian drawings inside the caves, and that's what I was attracted to your podcast, because they have actual shamans 4,000 years ago painted hieroglyphics in
Yeah.
these caves,
Yeah.
and so it's just neat to go down there and arrowheads and everything else. But the name, actually, the origin of the name Devil's River, Spanish explorers discovered it in 1590, and it was called St. Peter's River, or San Pedro, for years. And then in 1840, there was an expedition with a famous Texas Ranger by the name of John Coffey Hayes. He was an original badass. He was a really interesting person. If you ever get a chance to read about Captain Jack Hayes, he was interesting. But he went down there with some scouts, and it was probably in August, and it was hot, and they were battling maybe Comanches, maybe cactus, maybe hackberries and mesquites and rattlesnakes. And so they finally got to this beautiful place called the Devil's River, and they said, Captain Hayes, this is St. Peter's River. And he said, St. Peter, hell, this is more like the Devil's River. So as the story goes, Captain Jack Hayes named the Devil's River in 1840. So when you see that 1840 on our bottle, that's paying homage to Captain Jack Hayes from the Texas Rangers. On the side of the bottle, you'll see a little story about John Coffey Hayes. We have permission to use his signature and his background. So like you said earlier, there has to be a story with your brand. And our story is very Texas, a Texas hero, and using Texas water. And so that's kind of the background of the name, if that helps you.
Absolutely. And the fact that you guys are doing all this and making it a main focus of, I mean, yeah, you're making whiskey. That's great. But like, you're also focusing on sourcing the water and giving back to the community. You don't see that with a lot of distilleries. They're like, give me what's mine. We'll have a something, once a year we'll have a thing and people can come hang out or something like that. Maybe they'll donate to a couple fundraisers or something like that. But you guys are actually giving back to the community, which is amazing. And the fact that they're protecting the sky, that to me is really interesting because like, it's the
Yeah.
sky. Like I don't know how you could protect that. But anyway, it's
Yeah.
super cool. That's a super cool part of it.
Yeah, the origin of the sky was about 10 years ago. Well, probably not that long ago, maybe 6 years ago. There was a realtor out of East Texas who worked with some Chinese investors, and they purchased massive amount of land on the opposite side of the highway of the Devils River, and they put up these massive windmills.
Mm,
And the state was trying to block it, but they couldn't. And so there's hundreds of windmills down there, and they have those lights those airplane lights that
yes.
flash at night. I mean, Texas has a lot of wind in a lot of places, and it's got a lot uglier places, out in West Texas where it's flat and more boring than the Devil's River. So it was really a contentious issue. So the Devil's River Conservancy partnered with a lot of landowners down there, and they went to Austin and were able to pass this law that protects the night sky, thus preventing any more development of the windmill farms down there. So that's kind of why that happened.
That's awesome. I'm glad they were able to do that because, like you say, there's plenty of other land with a lot of wind that they can use. They don't have to take every part of it. And we all
Don't
know
do
that
it at the prettiest places, right?
exactly. And we all know those windmills don't produce near as much as they should, and they cost so much stinking money. And anyway, that's a totally different podcast. But
Right.
like it's just a hot mess. All right, so let's get into the whiskey. Let's get into the whiskey part of it.
Yeah.
What made you want to do start with bourbons and stuff like that? Let's go that route.
Yeah, I mean, starting with bourbon seemed like the obvious choice. Bourbon in 1980, you couldn't give bourbon away, but bourbon now it was like your old grandfather's drink, But now, in the last 10 years, it's become so important in a big part of our culture, all age groups. I mean, the typical customers ages, males age 35 and above, but we're seeing that constantly growing and expanding with younger consumers, all the Gen Zs, Gen Xs, millennials, they all are interested in spirits. And I think people say, why is that? Beer continues to lose market share, and they've had their challenges. For the last 2 years, a lot of people don't realize this, but spirits, in terms of sales, passed up beer for the first time ever. That
Really?
happened at the tap. It happened in 22, and it also happened in 23. That's from the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States report. So spirits continue to grow in popularity, specifically brown spirits. So whiskey was a hot category. It has been for a while, and I just felt like I'm not going to invest all this money and work so hard to try to push a rope uphill, as I say, to try to find something that people can relate to, and it won't be so hard to promote and sell. So it seemed like the obvious first choice. And we released that product in 2017, just in Texas, Devils River small batch bourbon. And people ask me a lot, what is a small batch? What does small batch mean? And a lot of people are curious about it and maybe afraid to ask, but the industry standard for what small batch is typically is 125 barrels or less. And so we take 125 barrels, which we actually do, and blend those together. And the purpose of that is to get consistency on profile. And so anytime you see small batch, that's usually what that means. It doesn't have to be 125 barrels. It can be 10 barrels, but typically that's what a small batch means. Um, I also wanted to do something different in terms of the profile with the mash bill. I like a high rye bourbon, and we're using a 75 corn, 21 rye, 4% malted barley, which is a somewhat common mash bill.
Hmm.
Um, and we're working with a couple of grain suppliers in Texas. These are co-ops. So
Hmm.
they work with farmers, and they're taking the top 2% of distillers' grains that are grown. Most of this comes from the Texas Panhandle. The corn is a number one yellow mint corn. The rye is a Brasetto rye, and the barley is also grown in Texas and malted in Texas. So it's a 100% Texas project, and that was important as well. It's grown in Texas. distilled in Texas, and owned and managed and run by Texans and bottled by Texans, and using water from Texas. So we have a lot of Texas pride.
Yes.
Then the second product we released was the Devils River Small Batch Rye Whiskey. The reason I chose that was, rye back many, many years ago, before Prohibition, was extremely popular, and it kind of lost favor. And the main reason I believe that it lost favor was because of the Whiskey Rebellion. George Washington imposed the first tax on Americans, specifically the farmers up in the Northeast. We were at $12 million in debt from the American Revolution, and he had to figure out a way to pay for it. So he came up with a tax for whiskey and glass pane windows. And there was a big upset group of farmers up in the Northeast, and taxmen were coming into those areas, and they were getting tarred and feathered. And George Washington said, enough, I'm going to bring in a militia of troops. I think it was some crazy amount, 10,000 troops or 20,000 troops, to get this under control. And they got their way. They collected the taxes and paid the debt off. We had a balanced budget. Imagine that.
Wow.
Now we spend $12 million a minute in this country. So it's quite a change.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize George Washington was one of our original commercial whiskey distillers in the United States. So as a result of that Whiskey Rebellion, those farmers moved away from that region down to what is the Commonwealth of Virginia back then, which later became Kentucky. And rye wasn't really grown down there as much. So it was because of a government involvement, it forced these whiskey makers to move to a different area. They were looking for a place with limestone filtered water. Kentucky and Tennessee are not magical places because they make the best whiskey in their opinion, and they do make great whiskey.
Right.
But you just need a place with limestone filtered water, and there's a lot of places like that in the United States. So you can make great whiskey in lots of places. They just happen to end up there. But rye wasn't as popular; it was mainly corn. So you saw the mash bill evolve and change, and therefore you didn't see as many rye whiskeys. So consumers weren't looking for it as much because it wasn't available. And for some reason, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, there's this resurgence of the popularity of rye whiskey. It's gone up probably 2,000% in the last 8 years. And so that was the reason I chose to do a rye whiskey, again, using Brasetto rye. Now, there's rye, this is my opinion, and everyone's entitled to one, right? So
absolutely,
the rye whiskeys that are out in the market at the time were very high rye. They were 90%, 95%, 100% rye.
Right.
And that's just their choice. So they can do that. But it's kind of like an over hoppy beer. For me, it's too much. So I decided to go with a much lower mash bill. So we barely qualify as a rye whiskey. It's 51% rye.
Okay.
Again, the Brasetto rye from the Panhandle, 45% corn, number one yellow dip, and the 4% malted barley. That's the mash bill in our rye. And I go to a lot of tastings, and I meet people that say, I don't drink rye whiskey. And I kind of press them to try it. And once they try it, they go, wow, I guess I do like some rye whiskeys. So I'm glad that we came out with that product next. And recently we were awarded the contract to get I guess we were lucky to get our rye whiskey on Norwegian cruise lines.
Oh, wow.
So that was a big win for us, a small little Texas craft company to knock out a very large rye whiskey producer, and we replaced their rye whiskey. So that was kind of fun. And then the next product we came out was a barrel strength whiskey. Our barrel strength is the same mash bill as our bourbon. It's a bourbon. It's 117 proof. By the way, our bourbon and our rye are 90 proof. I didn't mention that. It's called Devils River Barrel Strength, 117 proof. Probably the best value on the market for a barrel strength whiskey. And at the time that I created the barrel strength whiskeys were trending more and more, and you see them more and more. Yeah. Especially with the whiskey nerds and the whiskey geeks. I call them that. I'm one, and you see them in the bourbon clubs. They look for those kind of things. So I felt like it'd be important to make it an affordable, approachable barrel strength bourbon. And I truly believe that this is, again, my opinion. Me personally, I prefer barrel strength whiskeys. Just me as a drinker. Mm-hmm. I think it imparts more flavor. To me, it's a better value. You don't have to drink as much of it to get the same effect. And I think originally that was the intent of the distiller back in the 16, 17, 1800s, whenever they started making whiskey. And my theory is that these saloon keepers would get their monthly, weekly, every 6 month order of whiskey, be brought in by horse and buggy, and there were barrels of whiskey that they'd ordered. They put them in the saloon and they start pouring out of them. Well, you didn't know necessarily when you're going to get your next shipment. They didn't have Amazon back then.
Right.
And so I think that they started adding water to make it go further. That's
Right.
my theory. I don't know if it's right or not, but it
It
makes
sounds like
sense. Yeah. But I think that was the original intent, that whiskey was barrel strength. So then we kind of migrated into more states with our brands, and then we came out with our next expression, which is a Devils River single barrel. And a single barrel is exactly what it sounds like. It's a single barrel of whiskey. It is bottled at the proof that it is in the barrel at. Depending on where it is in the rick house, it's going to be lower, higher proof, higher on the top because of more heat. And creates about 27 to 33 cases of finished whiskey. Somewhere in there is the average. It has the name of the account that purchased it. So if it's a Costco or Specs or Total Wine, they would buy that single barrel and they would sell it in their stores. Um, I've sold a lot of single barrels to whiskey clubs around the United States. They like to do barrel picks, and so I'll work with our production manager, and we'll walk through and pick out just some exceptional barrels that really stand out. And single barrels are so interesting to me because you can distill on the same day. You can put the same mash bill, same yeast strain. You put it in a barrel, and they're side by side in the rick house for 2 or 3 years, and you pull them out, and they're so different. And
absolutely.
that's what's so unique about it. Every barrel has its own DNA.
Hmm.
They say that 100% of the color comes from the barrel, and about 60% comes from the barrel of the flavor. So barrel is extremely important, and it's like it's got its own personality. But that's kind of the bourbon evolution of the company. Um, the last bourbon that we produced was called Distiller Select, and it is a little bit more age on it. It's 120 proof, again, high proof whiskey. Um, and this was kind of a fun story. You said you like stories. I got a random call out of the blue from the former Secretary of the state of Texas, John B. Scott.
Hmm.
And I didn't know what he wanted. I thought I might be in trouble or something. But
Right.
he he said, Mike, he said, it's possible to meet. So I met with him, and he's explained to me he was an attorney in the private sector for over 30 years. And he was friends with Governor Abbott, and Governor Abbott appointed him to this. It's an appointed position. He met with me for lunch, and he said, I didn't realize what my role necessarily was 100%, but I didn't realize at the time that it was being a brand ambassador for the state of Texas. And he said, we have, dignitaries from other countries, others, cities, other states that come to Texas. We learn about each other, and there's always a gift giving occasion. He said, Mike, I go down to the gift shop at the Capitol, and I buy a couple of rocks glasses or a belt buckle, and I bring it back. And on my way back, I'm peeling off the Made in China sticker. He said, I'm just getting tired of that. It's embarrassing. He said, I'd like to have something that's truly Texas. So he said, I would like to make Devils River Distiller Select the official gift of the state of Texas. And that to me was just randomly happened out of the blue. And we had that program while he was in office. So that was pretty fun. And he gave me a proclamation to declare it that. So that was fun.
That's all. That's pretty amazing. That's a pretty big deal. Yeah. Yeah.
And as far as the brand goes, we're now in 38 states. We're in 5 countries. As I mentioned, we're on Norwegian cruise lines. We're also on Carnival and Celebrity cruise lines. And then we're in over 200 military bases around the world. So we've had a lot of growth and a lot of success in our short amount of time that we've been doing this. Does not come without challenges, but I love the business. As we evolved, I started seeing this trend. Once again, you got to look at trends and you got to pay attention. The flavored whiskey category continued to really grow. And so currently, as of 2023 report, flavored whiskey is now 25% of all whiskey being sold out there on the market. So
Wow.
that's a number I couldn't ignore.
Right.
But if I was going to do a flavor, it was going to have to be all natural. I just think it's important to me. It's important to our consumers that we don't do anything artificial. So the first product we released, we were the first ever to do it, which was a Devils River coffee bourbon, and got a little bit of flack from bourbon purists that don't want to like to use the bourbon label with the name flavor of any kind. But I get it. I mean, but there was others out there like honey and some others. But anyway, sometimes people get upset. But I had to move forward. That as long as the federal government approves your filing, then you can go with it. So the coffee bourbon, we work with a local San Antonio coffee roaster, and he imports beans. These particular beans come from Brazil, Honduras, and Colombia. And he puts them on the darker end of a roast. So it's a Vienna roast.
Hmm.
And it has the caffeine level somewhere between an espresso and a cappuccino.
Okay.
So a pretty good amount of caffeine.
Right.
And it's got the nice chocolate notes from those darker roasts, and then the sweetness element that you'll taste in the coffee bourbon, and we'll get you the sample so you can try all this,
Awesome.
is agave from Jalisco. So
Okay.
we import fresh 100% Blue Weber agave from Jalisco that gets infused into the whiskey. So we use our base whiskey, these three varieties of coffee beans and agave, and that is all natural, and that's what makes. And it's not a liqueur; it's a real whiskey. It's 40%, 80 proof.
Okay. Cool.
And so there was this evolution, especially on the West Coast. I started seeing the espresso martinis, and coffee drinks were becoming more popular. Coffee alcohol drinks, people drink it neat. They put it on ice cream. They put an ice cube in it. So um, that's that was how that worked out, and well received, and it's been awarded many times. The next flavor I released was agave bourbon, and that was the biggest surprise of all. Again, watching trends, the two hottest categories at the time were whiskey and tequila, and those still pretty popular today, the most popular aside from vodka.
Right.
So I thought, what if I combine the elements of those two? And so I put our base bourbon and agave together, and man, it's grown beyond all my expectations. It just continues to grow. It's brought in a whole new consumer base for us. Women who normally weren't whiskey drinkers. I'm not saying all women are not whiskey drinkers,
Right.
but some aren't. Some men aren't, and young consumers. But that agave bourbon has first ever on the market, but has been extraordinary for us in terms of the success of that product. And then the last flavor I released most recently was Devils River cinnamon bourbon. There's a lot of cinnamon whiskeys out there, but once again, I wanted to do something that was all natural. So we take our base bourbon and then we use agave for sweetness. And then the cinnamon is actually real cinnamon. Real cinnamon is about 3 times more expensive than artificial cinnamon.
Right.
And it comes from Sri Lanka, which is the process is a lot more labor intensive, but it tastes real, so much more real. There's not a syrupy consistency to it. It's very clean. And that's again a whiskey. It's not fake whiskey. It's real whiskey, 80 proof, 40% alcohol. And then the very last product that we released is our 5-year rye. We just released this literally 3 weeks ago. You
Wow.
can only buy it at the distillery right now, but we will be shipping out to our distributor. It's an allocated item, but it turned out excellent. It's that same mash bill I alluded to earlier.
Hmm.
And you were talking earlier about giving back, and that's important to me.
Mhm.
And everywhere besides Texas that I would go tell that story about supporting the Devils River, and they say, well, that's great that you support the Devils River, but what about the rivers in my state? And I thought that it was a good point.
Right.
So I started doing some research, and I found a DC based organization called AmericanRivers.org, and it's probably 250 employees, and it's completely funded by the government and private supporters. And it's a very well run organization, been in existence for about 50 years. And what they do is they take old American wild rivers that maybe had got dammed up and the dam is no longer functioning. And they'll go tear that dam down and let the water replenish the old area. And it's amazing how the river can heal itself if you let
Right.
nature run its course, so to speak. They, use this money for cleaning rivers. And so AmericanRivers.org is featured on this 5-year rise. So every bottle of of that whiskey, we make a donation to AmericanRivers.org. So I like the wild river thing. I mean, who doesn't love a wild river? It's kind of
Right.
an apolitical issue. I don't like politics, at least talking about it in public. So let's just keep everybody happy.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And if the people watching don't know, they might see me writing stuff down. I'm writing all this good information down because I will have it in the description below, including the organizations and stuff like that, so that you guys can click the links and see that everything that these guys are doing. I'm trying to get better at writing stuff down. So, but no, that is super cool. Yeah, I was informed about the 5-year rye, and I thought how interesting that was because most of the time, especially in Texas, of course, you can't let stuff age that long because it gets over oaked or something like that. Is there any special process you did to it to where it maintained the character that you wanted, but it didn't get to turn into too much?
Yeah, that's a great question. And people always, they're always talking about age. Age is a number, and whether you're a human or whether you're a bottle of whiskey. And so I think you know, you're right. Texas, we have 2 seasons. I like to joke, hot and hotter. And so we have plenty of heat in Texas. And our rick house is like a Blanton style rick house. It's all metal. Um, and it gets super intense in there in the summertime. You take a deep breath and the angel share is so thick, it burns your lungs.
Yeah.
So I mean, it really is that strong. So it does get to the point of diminishing returns, and we lose a lot of whiskey to angel share.
Mhm.
Um, so a 5-year in Texas is a lot of angel share loss for sure. Um, it's pretty well known kind of in our industry that if it's a 2-year here in Texas, it's going to be a 4-year somewhere else. Like a 2-year is equivalent to a 4-year in Kentucky or Tennessee because we don't really have big changes of season. We
Right.
don't have those big cool nights, that where it's 40, 50 degrees in the evening. So you have to be careful. We use a process called esterification, which is we're slowly adding water back to our barrels as we age. But this, instead of dumping water in at the very end, it has a much more pleasing effect in terms of maintaining flavor profile and the way that the chemical reaction that happens between the whiskey and the water. We also have 2 proprietary finishing processes that we do,
Okay.
which take away some of the, I would say, harsher alcohol overtones. They don't take away flavor, but they will take away some of the um, high, maybe high burning tones. I mean, a lot of whiskey people that are going to watch this are going to say, "Well, we love that burn." It's not that our whiskey doesn't burn. It's just we back off on that a little bit so you can enjoy the flavor more. I guess is the best way I can put it.
Okay.
So we're not going to compromise flavor with the processes that we use, but they
Okay.
do make a big difference.
Okay. That's cool. Tell us about that process if you can.
Sure. One of them um, is is proprietary, and but the other I can discuss. And every whiskey company is going to filter.
Right.
They're going to filter something, and it's important that the customer, when they see your product on the shelf, that there's not pieces of carbon floating around in the bottom of the whiskey. There's not a carbon tornado at the bottom. I mean, we get all kinds of funny names we hear from some brands out there that just unfiltered
Yeah.
whatever. I personally don't think that. I like to drink carbon, so I filter it out. And there's nothing wrong with it for those people that prefer to do it. It's just not my preference. Um, we also use a process that it's basically diatomaceous earth,
Okay. Yeah.
and we use a chill filtration. And chill filtration is kind of a nasty term sometimes with bourbon distilleries. A lot of them use it. A lot of them don't talk about it, but we use kind of a proprietary chill filtration process, which you drop the temperature, it causes the fatty acids and the protein chains to coagulate a little bit, and you can remove what you want based on the size DE that you use, the micron size, and the temperatures. And there's a ton of varieties of DE that are out there.
Hmm.
And a lot of people may not know, but DE basically comes from a diome, which is a single cell amoeba structure that lives in every body of water around the world, whether it's rivers or lakes or oceans. And I'm not 100% positive of this, but I want to say that diomes are responsible for 50% of the world's oxygen supply.
Oh
So they're
wow,
pretty damn important. I mean,
absolutely.
obviously plants and trees are important, but these little guys are very important for our environment.
Right.
So as these little guys are floating in the waters, they eat little small particulates and they build a shell around their body, and then they die, and then they fall to the ocean floor or the river floor or the river stream floor. And over time, they build up layers and layers of these basically diatomaceous earth. So I think there's something like 450 different varieties of DE in the world. This particular DE we get is from Canada, and it's a lake bed that we get this from. And if you look at it under a microscope, a strong microscope, you can see these DE panels will have these really microscopic shell surfaces in them, and it's fascinating to look at it under a microscope. But this particular DE just seems to work really well for filtering out what I don't want and keeping what I do want, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So that goes into a little bit more depth on how that process works. But like I say, there's some whiskey distillers that, put it from the barrel to the bottle.
Yeah.
Maybe it goes through a
Exactly.
coffee filter or something. So,
Yeah.
but we're a little different in that. And but I think the flavor profile speaks for itself. People are always surprised. The term smooth is overused in our industry so much, but people say, wow, this whiskey is really smooth, and it is. But we don't let flavor go. You'll get the flavor and you'll get the smoothness, and you can focus on the whiskey profile instead of a distraction of maybe acetates or methyl alcohol, something that's
Right.
overbearing.
Right. Exactly. All right. So one thing we haven't talked about, which I know the people that are listening are going to want me to ask. Let's talk a little bit about the process, the actual whiskey making part of it. Tell us a little bit about if, of course, what you can tell us. I don't want you to give us all your secrets, obviously, but what types of stills are you using? You said something about yeast. Are you using a proprietary yeast strain? Which, of course, if you can tell us, stuff like that, that we like to get super nerdy about it. So tell us a little bit about your actual process and how you go about, how many mash tuns you have and stuff like that.
Sure. So our distillery, if anybody has a chance to come see, is downtown San Antonio. We're about a block and a half from the Alamo and a block from the Riverwalk. It was quite a challenge to put a distillery in an office building. I was told by so many people that you'll never pull this off. You're never going to do it. I don't even know why you're trying, but I'm pretty hard headed, and we were successful. Our grand opening was March of 2020, as far as our tasting room, which was great timing.
Yeah, great time.
We couldn't be open for the first year, only for private events, no public events. So our official grand opening was April of 2021. All the equipment. This is the second time I've purchased equipment from this supplier. It is used to be called Christian Carl, but it's Carl Distilling.
Hmm.
They're out of a little town south of Stuttgart, Germany.
Yep.
They are the oldest still manufacturer in the world. They've been in business since 1867,
Yep.
and they make just incredible quality equipment, all hand built. They have about 20 employees, and they've done projects all over the world. I was with the manufacturer yesterday. I'm at a convention in Denver, American Craft Spirits Convention, and I was visiting with him. But he's working on a project in Japan where they're doing sake and another whiskey distillery in Japan. So
Man.
he has a fun job. He gets to go all over the world and build, put stills in place with customers. But it's a Carl still. It's everything was built by them. The fermenters, the mash tun, the column, everything. All the components were built by them. And I could not fit the column in one story, so I had to put a hole in the floor downtown. So the column actually goes through the basement into the basement, which is where we call our speakeasy. So people kind of like to see that when they go down there, they can actually see the still in the basement, which is kind of cool.
That is cool.
So yeah, and we do use a proprietary yeast strain. We do follow all the rules of making bourbon. For those of you that may not remember, may not know, we have to use an oak vessel. We use the standard 53-gallon American white oak. We use a couple different char levels depending on what product that we're making, and it's a char 3 or a char 4.
Okay.
There's typically 5 recognized char levels. Some said there's 6, but I use 3 and 4 for ours.
Right.
And then as far as the rules of bourbon, it's got to be at least 51% corn. And by the way, rye whiskey follows these exact same rules. It's got to be 51% rye to be considered a rye whiskey,
Right.
or 50% or more. And then you don't have to use grains from Texas, but we choose to. We distill. You're not allowed to distill it over 160 proof coming off the still. In other words, that's not legal. I will not disclose where we come off the still, but it's less than that by quite a bit. And the reason is, I think when you get to those higher levels, you get some of those things I was referring to earlier.
Yes.
Does it cost us more to make it that way? Yes, but the quality at the end speaks for itself. So I think that's something that's unique about us, is that we're not going to ramp it up to 160 just because we can.
Right.
I don't think it's necessary to take it that high. It also has to be barreled at 125 proof or less. We also don't follow that rule either. We barrel at a lower proof for that same reason. Again, it's costing us more money. You're not going to get as big as yields. You can, why not put 125 in and let the angels take care of it? But I just find a lesser proof in barreling is important. But again, we're following those guidelines. The yeast strain was developed. We do not propagate our own yeast. We have an outside laboratory that we work with that makes the yeast strain for us.
Okay.
I do not want to screw that up. Making yeast is a complicated process.
Definitely.
And I'll leave it to the experts for that. I mean, I'd love to learn more about how to do it, but I don't have confidence in myself or our employees' ability to make our own yeast at this point. So
Right.
the other thing that you get is consistency, guaranteed.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I don't think, give yeast enough credit. It's you can take the exact same mash bill and distill it the same day and put it in the barrel side by side, and with 2 different yeast strains, and they will be so different. And so the thing that makes yeast the most interesting to me is something that's called esters. Esters impart flavor, and certain esters within those yeast strains can really accentuate certain flavor profiles that you're looking for. If you're looking to have a more bolder, notes of honey or cinnamon or caramel, that can all be accomplished with your yeast strain. Mm-hmm. So if you're a distiller out there that's new in the business and getting ready to get in this business, play around with a bunch of different yeast strains, because there's some fascinating things you can find out and experiment with. And even if you're an existing distiller, just learn so much about how it can certainly affect the end flavor. Yeast is a vital part of the production of whiskey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny how everybody that I've talked to on this show, they're like, yeah, we have our own special yeast. We have we get it made for us, which is cool. And I talked to someone, Alan Bishop from Spirits of French Lick, and he was saying that they propagate their own yeast, and so like it's the terroir is in the whiskey as well, which is really cool. But that gets super nerdy. He's a big nerd, so like he would go deep into that. But like it's just crazy how every step of the process affects the final product. And if you have like I always tell everybody, good stuff in, good stuff out. I mean, that's, you put good stuff in it, then there's a lot of people out there making bathtub whiskey, and it tastes like bathtub whiskey. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So
yeah, hats off to the guy at that distillery for propagating his own. I know a few guys that do that, and it's to me, I just don't feel comfortable with it, and I like consistency. and the terroir changes with every season of growth on our grain, the soil that it's grown in, the water that you're using, the yeast strain, of course, the wood itself. Where does the wood come from? What forest? Is it Alabama wood or is it Missouri wood? And it all can play a part
Absolutely.
in the end process. To your point, and but that's what makes whiskey to me so interesting. I've got 10,000 barrels probably under that are in the rick house
Mhm.
currently, and every one of them's different. you know
Absolutely. Absolutely.
every one of them's different, and that's pretty crazy. It's like their own personality, their own fingerprint, I say.
Yeah, that's really cool. On your still, about how much liquor are you able to make per day?
We can produce, currently we're 3 barrels a day is maximum production.
That's good.
um yeah, but look, there's a lot of others that are much larger than us, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
we've gotten to the point to where we're exploring either expanding or outsourcing with maybe some other Texas distilleries to, we have to give them our recipes and supply us whiskey. But it's just economy of scale. As you grow, you've got to be able to, supply, what you need. So,
Right. Right. Yeah. No.
but yeah, it's we were just limited on our space downtown. So the process is we do the cook, um, we pitch the yeast, transfer it to our fermenters, depending on a lot of factors, which is another thing that affects flavor is how the fermentation goes.
Yes.
So 3 to 5 days typically, and then we're gonna transfer that fermented mash into the column still through the top, and the steam comes in from the bottom, and there's that collision that happens and separation. It's going to come off that still at a pretty high proof. That's the first run. They call it a low wine run,
Mhm.
and then we would redistill that in a pot still. So it is a double distillation process that we use. And the city of San Antonio does not allow me to store a large amount of alcohol in the middle of downtown. We're in an office building making highly flammable liquid. What could go wrong?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So we respect that, and we transport our distilled spirits from downtown over to. We have another facility that's a couple miles away where we do all of our blending, barrel aging, bottling, trucking. That's the other side of the business over there.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That's awesome. Yeah, because I was wondering, because yeah, in an office building, you only have so much so much space and only so many restrictions, especially being downtown like that. I don't know if
Yeah.
they want 10,000 barrels underneath underneath the
No.
Alamo. That wouldn't be a good
No.
look.
No. No. Yeah, we the first thing I did was I put an elevator in that building, a freight elevator that goes up to the alley.
Hmm.
And that's been super helpful when it comes to transporting grains in the building or transporting finished goods out of the building. Or if we have a private event, they're bringing catering down there. So we don't bother anybody else in the building. And we would try to be respectful of our fellow tenants in there. But it's a cool old building if you get a chance to go there. I love Prohibition. I've studied
Hmm.
it for years, and so
Absolutely.
I pay homage to that time period in our distillery. So it was built in 1918,
Oh
and
wow.
it was called the Washer Brothers Mercantile. And during the crash of 29, they folded, and J.C. Penney took it over. So it's really the original J.C. Penney in Bexar County,
Oh
and
wow.
it was there all up until the early 70s. But it kind of went in disrepair, and um, it was vacant when we found it. But I love the fact that we've been able to kind of help rebuild that side of Houston Street going towards the Alamo. There's a lot of great things going on in San Antonio,
There is.
and so to be part of that historical development was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that it sounds like it. And guys, if you haven't, and if you have the ability to get down to Devil's River, make sure you check it out. I, being so close to you guys, have never been to the distillery. It's on my to-do list for very soon, so don't hate me for it. But it's just one of those things, like you get worked in your little circle and you're like, oh, blah blah, and you totally forget about it. I go to San Antonio
Yeah,
all the time. How hard is it? But my thing is, I go to the rim and then I stop. That's my San
yeah,
Antonio trip. I go
yeah.
to the rim and La Cantera. That's about
Come
it.
down, come down and see us. We're open every day. The other thing that's important to me is the music scene. We
Yes.
have live music on our patio every night,
Oh wow.
which there was not a whole lot of live music in downtown San Antonio,
No.
even before the pandemic. And so since we've brought music to downtown again, it's starting, other businesses are starting to catch on and add it, which I love because I think that only makes more people interested in coming downtown. I'll say 85% of the people that come into our distillery are from somewhere else. They're not from San Antonio. So we'd love to have more locals come. But it's great to meet people from all over the United States, all over the world that come into our place and learn about our brand, and then they go back home and look for our product. So it's been a good, from I guess a brand marketing standpoint, to have that right in the middle of Tourist Central.
Right. And let's talk very briefly about that. You were saying something about you were in 35 states or 38 states, whatever. Like, how hard is it, um, relatively speaking, when you're opening a distillery to get your name out there? Like, that's got to be very difficult. I know for myself, being the small time guy that I am, trying to get my name out there is very difficult. And I'm sure it's the same. And you're sitting on thousands and thousands of dollars of product that you're trying to push at the same time. So tell us a little bit about that. We like to struggle as well. So
Yeah, I mean, anybody that is out there that wants to start a distillery, don't. It's expensive. No, in all kidding, we joke in our industry. We say, you put together your best thought of your budget and then you double it, and that's pretty much the truth. It's a very capital intense, very expensive business. Not only building the distillery and putting all the whiskey down and waiting for it to be ready, but then you got to go market it and sell it, and that's the expensive part. It's really building the distillery is the cheap part, believe it or not. So, and we spent $4 million on that part. So, it's a lot. How do we get to all these states? I'd say at the very beginning, we spent money on a sales force out there. It's very hard for a company to develop a brand with just one line of product. It's very It's expensive to have a good sales force that's out there. During COVID, I kept the sales force on as long as I could. It was about, I don't know, 4 or 6 months, but they weren't able to go do anything. Unfortunately, they couldn't call on any accounts because no one would let them. So I had to furlough our staff at the time, our sales staff, which I did not like. I mean, you're affecting people's families, and it was a hard time for everybody. And so we started rethinking the model when things started lifting, the COVID started lifting, and we partnered with Sazerac, actually.
okay.
So Sazerac, the big behemoth,
Yeah.
they are our sales force now.
Okay.
So that's been very helpful. The relationships that they have around not only the United States but around the world. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have been able to get into some of these markets. So it's still expensive because you still have to pay for that partnership, but it's probably more efficient way to do it, if you can find someone who can represent your brand in a meaningful way. But it's not unusual for a spirits brand to be represented by a sales force that might be a contract salesperson that represents 10, 12, 15 brands. We see that a lot too. But it's marketing. And then the other thing that's so important is liquid to lips. I say it all the time. Tastings. You got to do tastings. That's how we've built this brand, one customer at a time, trying our products, and I've tried to make our products for the most part very affordable. Most of our whiskeys are under $30,
Oh, wow.
which we don't make as much margin. Our single barrel, our distiller select, and our 5-year rye are all more than that. But it's at 49, 59, and 79 for those. But kind of equate it to like Nike tennis shoes. You can buy a cheap pair of Nikes, or you can buy a really expensive pair of Nikes.
Right.
Or
exactly.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that model. But most of what we do is pretty approachable. We want to sell where 80% of the whiskey is being sold, which is in that under $30 price point.
Right. That's awesome. That's awesome that you guys, because you see a lot of, and I'll throw this out there. You'll see a lot of Texas whiskeys that are substantially higher than that just because they're Texas whiskeys. Now some of them, there's a reason, because it's a small place and they have a lot of overhead. I get that, but like some of them are doing it just because they can, and so it's like, oh man, that kind of sucks. But it's really cool that y'all are doing that. All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna wrap it up here. Put a pin in it, I guess you can say. If you want to tell us your socials, where they can find you, the address to the distillery, anything else you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, the address to the downtown distillery is 401 East Houston. Again, it's a block and a half away from the world famous Alamo. We're open 7 days a week. We open at noon to midnight, Monday through Thursday. And excuse me, we open at 4 till midnight, Monday through Thursday. And then Friday, we're open from noon till midnight, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Awesome.
As far as our socials, devilsriverwhiskey.com. Facebook is Devils River Whiskey. And then my social media person does all this, but I think it's DR Whiskey is our handle. I'm not totally sure, but you can probably find it on our website. I apologize. And if
No,
you're
it's
looking
fine.
for our products, if you're in another state, we have a buy it now button, or you can actually go on our website and you can search your geographic area, and it'll tell you where in your community you can find our products. Appreciate your time, Randall, and I appreciate
Oh,
everybody's support for our brand. And it is not an easy business, but it's customers that help grow. We're one last thing we've done is a celebrity partnership with
okay.
Dave Bautista, and that's we're hoping that'll bring us some big things for 2024. We just started with that, and
Okay.
he's actually coming out with a brand new movie starting March 1st, Dune
Wow.
2. He's in
Wow.
that, so pretty exciting.
I didn't know if we could talk about that, so that's why I didn't even bring it up. So, but you brought it
No,
up.
no, it's
Cool.
fine. It's public information now. He's got 4 movies coming out this year, and he's filming 3 more. So great
That,
human
that's
being, loves animals, loves our whiskey, and he's an American patriot. He loves his country. So
absolutely. Love that. Love that. Well, stick on real fast. I want to talk to you after this, but I will have everything for Devil's River linked down below. Just go and make sure you follow all this stuff along with all my notes that I wrote. I will make sure that everything's in the description, including the mash bills and stuff like that. I'm trying to get better at that, guys. I promise. And make sure you go to their website and get some of their product because it's amazing. And yeah, don't forget the Patreon is open. It's flying. Let's go. And until next time, keep your spirits up.